most people, in my experience, wait too long to leave their full-time job from what I've seen. Now, there's some people who are impulsive and just decide they're going to quit today and have no plan. But for planners, they tend to wait until everything is paid for the rest of their life. They also focus on what they're making today instead of what do I actually need to live on? If I was living my ideal life, what does that look like? The the golden handcuffs are strong. And so I think it's really important to set a line in the sand of if I get to a certain amount of cash flow based on what I need to live my ideal life, then I am going to take the steps and leave my full-time job.
This is the Fit Investor Podcast, where we talk about how to live a more holistic life of being fit, not only financially, but physically and faithfully. We'll be joined by experts in all these areas to share their experiences and actionable and practical tips so that you can be a fit investor too. So now let's join our hosts, Cale Delaney and Brenna Carls.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of The Fit Investor. I'm your host, Cale Delaney. Our esteemed co-host, Brenna, I have a sore tooth, Carls, is at the dentist today, so she will not be joining us. However, our special guest is Mr. Kirby Atwell. And Kirby, after growing up in the south suburbs of Chicago, he served 11 years on active duty in the U.S. military, first attending the U.S. Military Academy at West Point and then traveling the world as an officer in the Army. During this time, he developed a strong interest in real estate entrepreneurship, and he began studying and reading as much as he could and bought his first rental property in 2006. 2011, he left the service, earned his MBA with a focus on real estate finance, and he started his first real estate investment company, rehabbing over 100 properties, either to flip or keep as rentals in the Chicago area. Today, he focuses on investing in high cash flow vacation rental properties. He owns a portfolio of vacation rentals in northern Indiana, where he lives on a 45-acre farm with his wife and young kids. He also helps others who work a full-time job to buy and set up their first high cash flow and vacation rental through his signature program called Your First Vacation Rental Investment Blueprint. And 10% of all profits that he earns are donated to support veterans in needs. So I'm looking forward to speaking about this. First off, Kirby, welcome to the Fit Investor.
Thank you. It's awesome to be here.
Yeah. And so we had actually met, just for our audience, we had actually met at a short-term rental conference down here in Miami a couple months ago, both on the short-term rental or one of the short-term rental panels. And we started talking, had a lot in common. We have our faith in common as well as the real estate and everything else. And so it was a perfect fit for coming on the Fit Investor, and look forward to exploring things. Why don't you just start us off a little bit? I know we talked about your background and your bio a bit, but why don't you expand briefly on your background and let's jump into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And first off, I just want to say I love your platform here, combining fitness, faith, and finances all together, which are three, I think, key pillars to leading a fulfilling and successful life. So it's really inspiring to see what you're doing with this platform. But just to give a little bit of background about where I'm coming from. So I tell people that I grew up a little bit with the rich dad, poor dad influence in my household. So my dad worked a city job. He was the director of a park district in Illinois in the suburbs of Chicago, and a very stable job, great job, fit his personality perfectly. He was really good at it, had a nice retirement, but it was a 9-to-5 paycheck, 1st and 15th, and a very stable job. And then my mom, on the other hand, when we were little, started a insurance brokerage that was eat what you kill, and she sold health insurance to small companies. And so she started with nothing and just had to cold call and start to build a book of business. And so I was always attracted to her business, that mentality of the harder you work, the more money you can make. And so I knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur when I got older, but I also knew that I wanted to serve in the military. I was fortunate to grow up in a Christian household, and that had a big impact on my life, and decided when I was graduating high school that I was going to try to go to West Point. And I played football at the time, and so that ended up getting me in, even though I never actually played at West Point. I played at prep school for a year and then got cut when I got to West Point, but it got me in the door. So I ended up staying there, graduating, and served 6 years as an officer. But I picked up that book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, in 2006, right after I graduated from West Point. And I knew after reading that, I was like, this is what I want to do the rest of my life. It just made sense to me, real estate investing. And so I bought a couple rentals while I was in the Army and cut my teeth, learned a lot on those, and then got out of the military and started flipping homes. And I started a home flipping business in Chicago with two friends of mine that I grew up with. And we ended up flipping about 70 houses around the Chicagoland area for the next 5 years before realizing that this was going to be a treadmill that I was going to be on for the rest of my life. And what I really needed to do is build cash flow. And so that's when I transitioned to rental properties and then later to these low cost, high cash flowing short-term rentals.
Interesting. The first thing that struck me really is that two things really. One is you said you knew you wanted to be an entrepreneur from an early age, which is great. And to have that clarity at an early age is a blessing. I know I did not have that clarity. And
I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to do something for myself.
just that alone, having that mindset is huge.
Yeah.
And then piggybacking on that is that right after you graduated, you picked up Rich Dad, Poor Dad and decided to take action on that. When again, just most people at that age or that point in their life are frankly not mature enough usually, or not thinking long-term enough to endeavor on something like that, or for Rich Dad, Poor Dad mentality to have a big impact. So what do you think perhaps was it about you that maybe allowed you to have that clarity, or that let it sink in at that early age and really have the confidence to take action?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know, like having 3 kids myself now, I used to think that you can basically guide a child or a person in the right direction and get them interested in certain things. And I realized that's totally out the window. Once I had my own kids, I realized they come out with like their set personality, their interests, their makeup, and there is so much innate built in. Obviously, you can work with that and love them and guide them along their journey. But I think I was always I'm not like a super extroverted person. I was more of a cerebral person. I think through things heavily. I do think about long-term security as a big comfort for me. I want to put things in place so that I have a security for the future. And so that was always there, but I didn't know what direction to go with it. And so I think that's why Rich Dad, Poor Dad sunk in so much, because I didn't really my mom would not self-identify as an entrepreneur. She just started selling insurance. It wasn't like there was this influence in my life saying, here's what you need to do to grow a business and be an entrepreneur. And I think if I had that earlier on, I could have avoided a lot of mistakes, because I still made a ton of mistakes along the way. But that's why I think the book really sunk in with me.
And was it the book that really propelled you towards real estate, or was there something else?
Yeah, no, that was. And I had Robert Kiyosaki on my podcast, and I asked him, I said, like, why is it that book is the biggest personal finance book of all time? And it's not even a real estate book, but it's probably bred more real estate investors than anything else out there. And I have no idea. He's once you figure that out, give me a call, because I've been trying to replicate it for years. But yeah, it's just like the concepts in the book get you think. And I went back and read it again 10, 15 years later, and it did not have the same impact. Like it's very beginner, but it just changes your mindset to start thinking about things differently than I had in the past.
That's funny. My experience was like the exact opposite. Like I think I read it probably around that same time as like after graduating, and it had no impact on me. And then I read it again. It was 4 or 5 years ago, and that's when it had that.
It'll be interesting, like after you've been real estate investing for about 10, 15 years, if it still seems like it's as revelationary as it was the first time or second time you read it.
Yeah, true. No. So that's awesome. And I want to dig in a little bit later into the business aspects and your military career and everything as well. I want to take a step back and go back into your faith journey. You mentioned you grew up in a Christian household. So both your parents were Christian?
Yeah.
Correct?
Yes.
Okay. Excellent.
Exactly. And my mom was more, I think, growing up, and then brought my dad into Christianity once they got married.
Okay. All right. Excellent. And that can always go one of two ways as well, right? You hear of plenty of people who grew up in Christian households that for one reason or another, unfortunately, may turn them in a different direction. And then you have, thankfully, in your case, where it keeps you in the right direction. So was there anything special about your upbringing that perhaps helped you hold on to your faith as you grew up?
Yeah, another good question. And I think there's a couple things there. My parents were they put the pieces in place for us to be Christians. Like we went to church, we were involved in youth group activities and things like that. But I've also seen, like you said, the parents who it's like, there's guilt there. It's if you don't go to church, you're going to hell. And it's like pounded into kids to where they hate it. And we enjoyed it. We enjoyed like all the youth group trips growing up and being involved with kids from school. And obviously they say you're the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. We were involved with church a lot. So we had a good friend group that had similar values growing up. And I think that was really important. But to be honest, as I got into college, I strayed a little bit from my faith and just explored other things and just it wasn't as involved with church. And so it was a journey for me coming back then to my faith. Not that I ever didn't identify as a Christian. I just wasn't really practicing like I am now and like I was when I was younger. And my struggle always with Christianity is like how overt to be with my Christianity. Because you see the signs on the side of the road saying, repent or you're going to hell. And it's like people screaming at you on the street corners. And I think that's one extreme. And then the other extreme is you're hiding and you don't share it at all. And so eventually, and I didn't feel like I was always the perfect example of Christianity through my college and younger years. And so I didn't want to be vocal about it because then I'd be labeled a hypocrite. And everyone's a hypocrite. Everyone makes mistakes and sins. So I think as I've gotten older, the thing that I've realized is just trying to set up your lifestyle in a way where you can be an example. And you don't have to beat people over the head, but they cause people to ask, what's different about him? What does he have that's a little bit different? I want some of that, like that peace or that comfort, knowing God, knowing Jesus. And that's what I've strived to do as I've gotten older. And to me, that has felt like a really good balance.
Right. Now, what was it, or was there anything in specific that kind of started drawing you back after you mentioned that you strayed a little bit in your college years?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it was always there, and I always just felt like a piece was missing as I was going through college and then in the military. And I blamed it on I'm just busy and I don't have time to be connected to God, and which was ridiculous. Like it would have made everything so much better as I was going through those experiences. But I don't think there's one thing. I think it was just knowing that I wanted to live my life differently and making that decision. I think it just boils down eventually to a decision that I'm going to live my life one way or another. And I want to follow a Christian path and I want to raise my kids that way as well. That had a big impact as well. And I think maybe those couple of things.
Right. And how old are your kids now?
My oldest is 6, and then I've got a 4-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. So pretty young.
Yeah. Fun ages right now.
Yeah.
So what do you, and I'm asking you, parent to parent here, what do you do in your life to try to guide them and like you should have a similar experience where they want to continue in their faith? As a father, what do you do or what do you hope to do with your children?
Yeah. I'm by no means an expert here, but my approach is very similar to my parents' approach because I feel like it was pretty impactful on our lives. And so we make Christianity fun. It's not, oh, you got to check the box and go to church again this week. Like they get excited. It's Sunday. I get to go to church. And we incorporate Christian lessons in like books that we read at night and the shows that they watch and stuff like that are fun, that they enjoy. It's not like sitting down and reading from the King James Bible just to try to beat it into their head. And so they get excited about Jesus and about their faith at this age. And so my goal is that just continues and that that it's not always you're celebrating every time you're connecting with Jesus, but I think the more of that you can breed into your kids, the more it will stick with them.
Yeah. No, I like that you said that. And I think you, especially at those ages that your kids are at, I think you hit it on the head probably with, making it enjoyable and making it fun. And you made me think of it is that my youngest, who's 4, just like you said, like he loves Sundays. He loves church. Like he's always asking, can we go to church? How many more wake ups until church?
Yeah.
And no, of course he's not getting a huge theological training when he goes there. Like he goes there because it's fun and there's other kids to play with and You get some goldfish crackers and that type of stuff. Still getting into the habits and just establishing those relationships. And hopefully as he grows older and continues to go there and continues to be a part of the church, that he can have that same enjoyment. And our older kids who are 10 and 12, they maybe not as enthusiastic, but they enjoy it as well. And like you said, I think it's being connected and being in the different groups and going to various camps. Like our oldest, he just got back from a 4-day trip that he went to with the church, where they were actually, for 4 days, they were going door knocking in Tampa, Florida, and spreading the gospel, which was a great experience for him.
Yeah.
And then continuing to surround yourself, like you mentioned, which helped you, continuing to surround yourself with people who share the same values and the same morals. I think that, if anything, is probably one of the most critical things. And when you get into high school or college, where most people, if they stray, tend to stray as we get around the wrong company.
And I think that's how anything like grows. Like with sports, it starts off as you can't dribble a ball, but you're hanging out with your friends, just messing around, having fun. And then you get a little bit better at it, a little bit better at it. And then all of a sudden you realize, okay, I can do this. Like I can actually win games, and I can, if I work a little harder, I can win championships. And with real estate, it's the same thing. Like you're messing around with it in the beginning, and it's fun looking at properties and remodeling properties, doing that stuff. And then you realize, okay, actually can change my financial situation. And I think that's the best approach, is to make it fun in the beginning. And then as they become more connected to God and realize there's a lot of benefits to that, and I feel like a better person, I feel like more of a whole person, then they want to go deeper on their own.
And I'm curious too, again, just parent to parent, especially today with how commercialized most of the major holidays are. And of course, we have Easter coming up.
Yep.
As we record this. How do you make sure that your children get the real message of the holiday versus just the commercialized version?
Yeah, that's really ironic that you asked that, because literally an hour ago, I was having breakfast with 3 kids, and we were talking. I said, you guys know that Easter is only 5 days away at this point. And they're like, really? And I said, yeah, the Easter bunny's coming. And I said, but do you know why we celebrate Easter? And you could see them just thinking. And so I let them think through it. I don't explain it. I ask questions and see if they can figure it out. And they enjoy that process of trying to figure it out. And then, explain one piece of it and then ask another question. And I think that's what makes it sink in, as opposed to saying, here's the whole story and going through it and glosses over their head. So I try to piece it out a little bit. And then after that conversation, I could see my son, who's 6, sitting there, and he's going, what about this aspect? And what about that aspect? And so next time when it's brought up again, he's going to have a better understanding. Not that you can explain the whole concept of Easter in one sit down, but it's just like these bite-sized interactions where we just bring it up and ask questions mostly.
I like that. And your wife, I assume she's Christian as well?
Yeah.
All right, excellent. Well, that certainly helps.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm curious, in going to a military college and going directly into the military after that, and I'm sure things have probably changed between now and then as well, but at that time, I guess, what am I trying to say? Was it okay to be open with your faith in the school and in the military, or was it frowned upon or anything like that?
Yeah, no, I think it was. I was fortunate. I don't know. I can't speak. I got out in 2011. So it's been quite a few years, 15 years or so, 14 years, something like that, since I left the military. And a lot's changed since then. But when I was in, it wasn't frowned upon to discuss Christianity or anything like that. But things change over the years, and it could be at this point. So I was in a very, I think, fortunate time.
Okay. And what was it about the military that intrigued you? Because I know you mentioned you knew that you wanted to be an entrepreneur, but you also knew that you wanted to be in the military. Is there a family tradition with that, or what was it about being in the military?
Yeah, I think that was the biggest impact on me growing up. My great-grandparents were in World War I. Both my grandfathers were in World War II. One was Navy, one was Army. And then my dad was in during the Vietnam era. He went to Ethiopia. He didn't go to Vietnam, thankfully, but he served. He was drafted during that time. So growing up, I heard stories about the military and their experiences. And so it had a big impact on me. And I thought, it's something I want to do just to serve. I knew I didn't want to make it a career. I always wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I just wanted to do it once I got to that age.
Gotcha. I gotta say that's probably one of my biggest regrets is not serving in the military. And when I was in high school, I think it was probably my junior, I think it was probably my junior year or something. I had started to look into it and I had met with some recruiters and things like that. And the one thing that prevented me from going in was that I would have had to delay going to college by one semester to do the basic training and everything. And at that point I was just, too short-sighted and
Yeah.
no, I don't want to delay things. I want to get there and get it over with. And I didn't end up, enlisting, but that's one thing to this day that I still regret. I wish that I would have at least put in some service. And I know there's a lot of opinions about the military nowadays. And I believe there are a lot of unfortunate shortcomings in the way things have developed in the military now. But I do believe that it is still something that we could benefit as a nation if more people took pride in it and learned the discipline and the respect that I think it can give us.
Yeah.
And, that's neither
I-
here nor there. That's just my opinion.
Yeah. And I think it's such a personal decision for everyone. I almost left West Point because you can go for 2 years and have no commitment. You have no commitment your first 2 years. You can walk away at any time. And then when you step foot in your first class, your junior year, you're committed for the next 2 years and then 5 years of service as an officer afterwards. Those first 2 years are brutal, knowing that your life sucks, but you can walk out at any time. You're the only one keeping yourself there, and all your credits will transfer to another college. The setup is great if you want to get 2 years, free years of school, as long as you're willing to endure it. So it messes with your head, and it was so much easier as soon as I started my junior year and was committed.
Right.
Decision was gone. It was just like, this is what I'm doing. Yeah, it's a very personal decision, but I agree with you. I think a lot of people that don't know what they want to do drift. And I think it's a great option to get a great breadth of experience doing a lot of things and then teaches you a ton of skills at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you served as an officer in the Army. Was there any specialty that you were involved in or any cool experiences or stories from your time?
Yeah. Yeah, I was an air defense officer. So I was a Patriot missile operator. So there's a Patriot missile system that shoots down other planes and missiles. And so I operated that for 2 years in El Paso, Texas. And then I was picked up as a general officer or as a general officer's aide. So my unit was getting ready to go to Korea for a deployment over there. And at the same time, this general officer interviewed me to be his aide. And he's like, so I flew to Hawaii to be his aide because he was in charge of all the air defense in the Pacific and the headquarters was in Hawaii. So for 2 years, I basically shadowed him and it was amazing. I learned so much. It's like basically being in every meeting of a CEO of a big company because we're just flying from one country to another, meeting with other general officers from other countries and all the units that he was commanded over. So I learned so much. And then I took command of a small homeland defense site in northern Japan after that. So for 2 years, we had a radar right on the Sea of Japan in northern Japan that monitored North Korea for missile activity. And so I was in charge of this site. There's about 100 guys that worked for me there. And my boss was in Hawaii. So it was a very autonomous situation. And I learned so much in that capacity as well, because I was running this thing at 28 years old. And so it was a big responsibility. So yeah, I had an awesome experience. I felt bad because I had so many friends from West Point who either lost their life or got blown up and lost limbs. And during that same time, and I never experienced any of that, but it's like the luck of the draw in the military.
Were you married when you were in the military or was that after?
No, it was after. Yeah, it's tough to be married in the military. I was fortunate. I met my wife right after I got out.
Okay, got it. And what was it that made you not want to pursue the military as a career?
I think the combination of knowing that I had the entrepreneurial spirit, and that's what I really wanted to do is own something for myself. And then not owning your life, really. You're told this is where you're going to be, and you have some options in terms of locations and types of jobs and stuff like that. But after I did command as a captain, that was my rank, I knew that I was in line to do a lot of staff jobs, it's called, where you're basically doing a lot of office work, PowerPoint, stuff like that. And it did not sound appealing to me. And so I wanted to get out and start my own business at that point.
Gotcha. Okay. And I guess we might as well just jump into kind of the fitness aspect of things. So of course, I'm assuming during the military, I would assume have some type of fitness regime there. Right? Were you always somebody who, you mentioned you played football and stuff before, so were you always someone who was pretty active and took fitness as seriously, or was that really instilled throughout the military?
It was instilled with football. I went to a huge school in the Chicago suburbs. So there was 1,100 kids in my class in high school, 4,500 kids in the school. Yeah, it was enormous school. So you can imagine the athletics at a school that size are pretty competitive. And so initially I played basketball and football my freshman year, and then you have to choose unless you're just like a super athlete, one sport. So I chose football, and it was year round. As soon as the season would get over, you'd start the off-season training. And so I was just so used to that routine of working out. And we did, 3 days a week of lifting, and then you do the speed drills and stuff like that in between. And so it was natural. It was a natural transition in the military. And I stuck with that same routine throughout my entire life, just as like having exercise as part of my just daily routine. This morning I woke up and go to the gym, and it's just like part of what I do. But over the last couple years, I've actually gone a lot deeper in terms of health and diet and really understanding the mechanics behind it. Because I look back and I could have had so much more progress had I understood actually what's happening in your body, instead of just, you got to just work out as hard as you can and then eat as much protein as you can. And that's like the answer. And I started doing blood tests regularly with a doctor and just seeing what my levels are, and realized and it started because my cholesterol was high. At 40 years old, they want to put me on statins. And I'm like, this seems weird. Like at 40 years old, I work out all the time. And so I started doing blood tests and realized that some of my markers were way off. They're like, do you drink a lot? And it's like, no, I barely ever drink, but I had fatty liver, non-alcoholic fatty liver. And it was, more of the grains and stuff that I was eating, and never imagined. Like I thought, what's wrong with that? I'm eating whole grains, but it had a big impact on my liver. And, adjusting my diet over the last few years and doing continuous blood tests and different supplements and stuff like that. And it's changed dramatically. Like all my blood work is so much better now. So it's been a really interesting, I thought I was super healthy my whole life, but until I got really deep into what's actually happening and how certain foods and different supplements impact what's going on in the body. And when you work out, how you work out, all that stuff, I feel like it's been a huge learning curve over the last couple of years.
What have been some of the major maybe shifts or changes or things that have impacted that you've learned through this?
Yeah. So from an exercise standpoint, I've incorporated a lot of walking and like the zone 2 and 3 workouts, which I never did before. It was always like full go or nothing. Go and lift as hard as you can, then get on and do interval training on a treadmill. And I realized that kills you. The next day. You have a big like recovery time shift. And also I realized after like studying it, your body's actually burning a lot of glucose instead of fat. Like the fat burning zone is like the zone 2. And so I've incorporated a lot more of that in, and I feel like it's balanced me a lot better. And then from a dietary standpoint, the biggest thing is just cutting out all processed foods. I pretty much don't eat any processed foods and sugar. And it just totally changed everything. If people just cut out processed foods and that's all they did, I think their lives would totally change. Their health would totally change.
100%. Oh my gosh. Yes. And sugar, like I'm big against sugar, and I'm in processed foods as well. And I wish I was completely off processed foods. It's so hard, and especially in our society here in Western culture to do that.
You basically, it's hard to go out to eat because it's like, it's everywhere, everything. Like, yeah, exactly. It's very difficult. And to clarify, I still eat sugar, but it's only right after I work out, like after I lift, just to get glucose in my muscles. But beyond that, it's just whole foods. Like unless it grew in nature, I pretty much don't eat it.
So like I guess give us some tips then. How do you cut out processed foods, or what are some typical meals for you?
Yeah, we have, and I feel bad for our kids, but they've grown to love it because they don't know any different. We have a very boring diet. So we order from the Wild Pastures is the name of it. So it's a meat ordering, grass-fed, grass-finished beef and chicken and pork. You can pick what box you want. So we have a box delivered every month. We also we trade because we live on a 45-acre farm here. And so we have a big hay field. And so we trade hay to a cattle farmer down the street, and he gives us a half a cow at the end of the year. And so we have that butchered, and so we freeze it. So we have a ton of ground beef and steak and stuff. And most of our meals revolve around some meat and then just a lot of vegetables and potatoes and stuff like that worked in. And that's pretty much most of our meals. I every day, pretty much, I have bone broth with some sort of eggs or chicken or something added to it. And then we do just a lot of meat and vegetable type meals. And so I cut out all pasta, anything in a bag, really, like chips, any of that stuff, I don't eat. I still have a tendency to overeat at night. That's my biggest downfall, is because I'm pretty disciplined during the day, and I'll eat healthy, but I just eat way too much at night. And so that's what I'm working on now. But cutting out the processed food in general just has made me so much more energy, thinner, like from a body composition standpoint, it's just been a game changer.
Yeah. No, man, I'm so glad to hear that. I'm going to check out Wild Pastures. I do a similar like meat mail order type thing, but I've been looking for a different one because their options have not been the greatest as of late, but I'm going to check that one out.
Yeah.
And living on a farm certainly helps. What kind of farm? What do you have? Do you have different animals? Lots of stuff like that.
Yeah. So we bought a farm, I guess it was 4 years ago now. We always wanted to live on more land, and it was an abandoned farm. No one lived there for 15 years. So we had this old farmhouse and several barns. And so we fixed up the house first and moved in, and then we started fixing up the barns. And now we have an Airbnb in one of the barns. And then we started getting different things. So initially we planted just tons of food: raspberries, blackberries, blueberries, apples, peaches, cherries, every type of fruit you can grow in the north. We grow, probably different from what's grown down there. And then we have a big garden, but that's all pretty seasonal. It's amazing. The raspberries grow from May till October continuously, which is great because we have all different varieties. And then we got chickens right after that. So we've got 50 chickens. So we have eggs everywhere. We have way too many eggs. We're going to start selling them here soon. We got a couple peacocks just because our Airbnb guests love them, and someone was giving them away. We're getting bees here shortly, so we're going to have our own honey. We planted mushrooms. So that's a very different process. You cut down logs and you inoculate these logs, and we have a mushroom bed and stuff. So that's new this year. We planted it last fall, so this will be our first growing season for that. We try to incorporate a ton of stuff because as much as we can live off our own land, the better. And then, like I said, we have a 40-acre hay field as well. So we just give that hay, because I didn't want to buy all the hay equipment and harvesting and stuff like that. So we give it to a farmer who he takes care of. Like, he gives us half a cow. He plows our drive. He does a ton of stuff for us. So it's a good trade.
Oh, that's awesome. So you're living my dream there. That's literally, I want to be on a farm. I want to be self-producing. Like, literally just this morning, I was looking at chicken coops.
Really?
Like, we don't have land down here in South Florida, but I think I can sneak in some chickens.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, the Airbnb in this barn, so I'm standing in my office, which is in the same barn as the Airbnb. We finished this whole barn. It's 55 by 65 foot. So it's a huge barn, but the Airbnb is only 800 square foot, and it pays for the entire farm. We make $45,000 on it a year because it stays consistently booked up. Our guests love it. We built a gym in part of the barn. The guests get to use that, which they love as well. So it pays for the gym as well. It really, this tiny little 800 square foot part of the 45 acres pays for the entire 45 acres. It's cool to incorporate things like that into your dream scenario, and it can help pay for it.
Hey guys, it's Brenna Carl, CEO and co-founder of The Mortgage Shop. When I'm not spending my time searching for the best pizza in town, working out, well, because of pizza, or fighting sharks, as Kale likes to say, I spend my time educating clients on the best investment products that will help them build generational wealth and making sure their loan process is as smooth as warm butter on a piece of toast. Call us today to get started with your investment journey at 800-816-7982, or, to talk more about pizza. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, so I love this. And that's a perfect segue in talking about the business and the short-term rentals. I know you mentioned you started off doing the flipping. and then you transition because you saw that it never ends. Did you have any, I'm sure it was a learning experience. Are there any major wins or major failures of that flipping experience that you'd like to share?
Yeah, the big thing that we learned, so the way it started is we moved from Chicago over to Northwest Indiana, where we're at now. And initially we didn't move to the farm. We moved to a house close to Lake Michigan, and it was this 1970s house, all original shag carpet and paneling and all that stuff. So we were going to rehab the house, but it had this walkout basement. And this was back in 2017. And so we were like, I keep hearing about this Airbnb thing. What if we just turn this unused, unfinished basement into a separate apartment and see what happens? And so we figured at a minimum, we're adding equity to the property. So what's the downside? So we did that. In the first summer, it booked out and we made over $20,000 and knew nothing about pricing, about anything. And it was this 1-bedroom apartment with no windows in the basement, but it was close to the beach and there weren't that many of them. It just stayed booked. And that was just over the summer. We didn't even book it through the winter because we had a really steep driveway and we were worried about guests and stuff. So after that experience, we thought, okay, let's scale this a little bit. And we started buying single family homes, and those were good as well. Pretty affordable single family homes nearby. Michigan City, Indiana is our target market. But then we realized when we bought our first small multi-unit that the cash flow is just off the charts compared to single family that we were buying, because the nightly rate per unit was lower, but we were buying them for about the same price as the single family home. So slightly lower per unit, but you got 2 streams of income. And then we'd list a super listing, we'd call it, where you'd list the whole building together. So we'd have the versatility in the summer when big groups are traveling together, friend groups and grandparents and their kids and all that. They could book one place for all of them to stay, which they loved, and there's not nearly enough of them. But then in the winter, when it's small groups or people traveling for work or weddings or funerals or any of that stuff, we had multiple units that we could book out. And the cash flow was just incredible. And so we started scaling that strategy. And that's what I teach to other people now too. And it works in more affordable markets just outside of cities, especially throughout the Midwest and Southeast, where it's more affordable and the cash flow is just really strong.
So what does your portfolio consist of now?
So we have 21 listings total, and that is across 10 properties and 15 units. And then in addition to that, we have 9 units that we're either building or rehabbing. So we bought 2 units. One of them we're turning into a 3-unit property. It's this big historic building that we're converting the attic into a 3rd unit. One of them's a house with a coach house. And then we're actually building 2 duplexes from scratch right now as well.
Nice. Okay. And you mentioned, so Michigan City, and what is the draw there? What brings people?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. Like, why would anyone travel to Indiana? So it's an hour outside of Chicago. So that's one of the first things that I tell people to look for is like areas within driving distance to a larger population center. Because then you get all the utilitarian reasons people travel that have nothing to do with vacation, but people are going to go to weddings, they're going to go to funerals, they're going to just visit a town, a big city, stuff like that. You get all those travelers. And then in addition to that, we're right next to Lake Michigan. We're right on Lake Michigan. So in the summertime, it is a lot of vacationers, and we can really increase our price point, make a ton of profit in the summer. And then in the off season, you've got an outlet mall, you've got a big casino, you've got wineries in the area. There's blueberry and apple picking. There's all these different localized draws that draw people in addition to the utilitarian reasons that people are traveling.
Okay. So I'm glad you bring that up, because I think that's important, because with short-term rentals, vacation rentals, like it is amazing that you can literally be successful with them anywhere.
Yeah.
Like, you'd be surprised. People travel everywhere.
Yeah.
And, so it doesn't need to be necessarily a top vacation destination market. It can be anywhere, literally. You mentioned starting up with a basement apartment, right? And you were surprised at how well that did. You talked about your 800 square foot unit in your barn.
Yeah.
That is paying for the entire farm. And this is what I love about short-term rentals. They are, maybe it's not the best way to put it, but they are almost like a gateway drug into the real estate world, right?
Yeah.
And they're so powerful when it comes to cash flow. They are a little addicting. right? Because once you see the potential is, wow, I want to scale this to some degree. And you don't need to, if you don't want to invest remotely, you don't need to live in, again, a top vacation market, right?
Mhm.
You can test it out and see how it works. Or if you don't have a great market that you're in, then you can invest remotely and find a good market to do it in, right? There's just so many options, so many ways to do it. You can do it with single family. You can do it with small multifamily, like you mentioned. The boutique hotel thing is all the craze right now.
Yeah.
There's just so many different ways to do it, so many different avenues to do it. And the barrier to entry is relatively low. And besides the ownership model, there's different ways to do it as well, co-hosting, arbitrage, and those types of things. So it's just such a powerful tool that it is getting a lot of popularity right now, which is, I think it's good for people to look into it and see the potential. And it allows you and your family, and same with me, to live off rentals.
Exactly. Yeah. And to your point too about how it works in so many different locations, I think the key is understanding who your ideal guest is and just speaking to them. When you were on my podcast a few weeks ago, you talked about the one you have in South Florida with all the amenities in the backyard that way outperforms the competition. And that got me thinking about the money we're potentially leaving on the table. And we're going to test some amenities here. It's a very different traveler from Miami to Indiana. It's easy to say all short-term rentals should have these amenities, but it's key to really analyze the other comps in your area and understand what performs the highest. But I think based on what you were telling me, we're going to test out a few of those things here, and we've got the space to try it out.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. I'd be interested to hear how that goes.
Yeah.
So what's your plan for the future in terms of your real estate business?
Yes. We always had the goal of building economies of scale with one location first and getting to a place of financial freedom. And so that has served us really well because a lot of people come into it and say, I want to own a vacation rental in every market I ever want to visit. And can work, but then you're building a team in all those locations and having to understand the laws and rules. And there's so much to track that way. You're spreading yourself really thin. So what's worked well for us is to go deep in one location. We have a great cleaning team. Now we have 9 cleaners that rotate through and they can clean 3-4 properties in one day because they're 5 minutes from each other in the same town. And they love that. And so it builds a lot of loyalty. But long term, we realized that at some point you do want to diversify and not have all your eggs in one basket. So long term, we wanted to be in a warmer climate. And so we're actually building 2 duplexes. The 2 duplexes we're building are in Port Charlotte, Florida. So not too far from where you're at. And we're testing out the model down there. So our goal is to have 2 locations where we can spend personally a lot more time down there in the wintertime when we don't want to be in Indiana. And it can also cash flow really well. So the numbers work really well on those. And so that's the goal from our business. We don't have huge growth plans because we're in a place where we have the cash flow to pay for our lifestyle at this point. But we also, I train other people how to buy their first high cash flowing short-term rental. And that's been some of the most fulfilling work that I've done over the last 3 years since I left my full-time job. I've worked with about 200 people. And every week now, there's people buying properties that fit this model. And they're coming back and saying, this literally changed my life. I really enjoy that component of it and in working with people and in doing the podcast and the platform to just get the word out that it's possible not to just live the traditional 9-to-5 lifestyle.
Yeah. And how does your program work? Is it a group coaching thing? Is it one-on-one or is it just recorded sessions or what is it?
It's a combination. It's very hands-on. So that's why I haven't scaled it huge because I work with every single person individually. So there's a combination of it's a very step-by-step program that's laid out that people have access to. But then every week I do Q&A/coaching calls with people and we actually go through deals they're considering buying so that members who are doing this for the first time can feel comfortable. I pressure test the deals, look at their assumptions, just make sure they're going into it eyes wide open. They're not going to make a big mistake. And so, and there's,
or is that one-on-one?
That's a group. Yeah. So once a week we do a group call and I'll stay on those as long as needed until every question, every deal's gone through. And then there's a community portal as well, just for the members where we're in there every day answering questions and supporting that way as well.
Very nice. Very nice. And what about, do you have aspirations to branch off out of short-term rentals and the real estate space, or you think that's where you're going to make your stand?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've tried just about every strategy out there at this point. I did a commercial apartment building in the past and for a while I thought that's the direction I was going to go and realized it's just not my personality and not what excited me. Obviously, I've done the flips. I've done long-term rentals. We had a decent sized long-term rental portfolio that we sold off once we discovered this strategy. So I don't want to say never will do anything else, but I love this niche. And so I've just gone deep in this niche. Now, there's been a few guests who've come on my podcast that have talked about like the industrial flex space, which is very hands-off. I think it's a good complement to what I'm doing. So again, like getting back to diversification at some point, if I want to diversify some of my capital out of just one strategy, then I can do that. But the great thing about this strategy that I'm doing, they all work as long-term rentals as well. So if something changes with short-term rentals, they still cash flow as long-term rentals. So I could always switch back to long-term rental model as well.
No, that's excellent. And that's an important thing that you just brought up there too, because that again goes to the different markets and different scenarios that you can be in. And that if you're not in a prime vacation rental market, then you have a much better probability of finding something that does work as a long-term rental.
Yeah.
And rental versus where I'm at in the prime vacation markets. Yeah. I'd lie. There's really no such thing as long-term rentals in those markets. But there's just so many different avenues and paths and exit strategies to look at with it. So lots of pros and cons for everything.
Absolutely.
And so any tips or teasers that you could give our audience based on your program of what you find drives success?
Yeah. So my target that I created for buying properties under my model is what I call the 1% net rule. Most people have heard of, if you've done long-term rentals, you've heard of the 1% rule of thumb, which is whatever you're buying it for, you should get a gross rent on a monthly basis of 1% of that purchase price. So you buy it for $100,000, you're making $1,000 a month in gross rent. And that's like the rule of thumb for, okay, this is going to be approximately a good deal. What I created is the 1% net rule. So whatever we have into the deal, my target is to make 1% net after all my expenses and cash flow. If we put $200,000 into a deal, I want to make $2,000 of net cash flow on a monthly basis after all my expenses. And so very difficult to do with single family, but with these small multifamily, it's very possible, especially in more affordable markets. So that's one thing that I would provide is a rule of thumb when you're looking at properties, if the goal is as much cash flow as possible. And then the other thing is, I really wish when I was younger that somebody would have told me to focus on cash flow before building wealth. And I never understood that, and 90% of people out there, I would say, are in the opposite boat. All their focus in investing is on things that will be worth a lot more down the road, whether they're investing in their 401k, in mutual funds, in stocks, in crypto, whatever it is. The vast majority of their investments are in the hope that this thing is going to be worth a whole lot more down the road. And in the meantime, they're not getting paid by that investment. And I can't tell you how many people I talk to who are interested in my program who come into it halfway through their career. And in the beginning, they thought that if they just saved enough and invested enough, they'll get to a place of financial freedom eventually. And to a person, every one of them, I haven't met one yet who said, I feel comfortable. I could just leave my full-time job and live off my savings or my investments. And some of them have multiple millions in their 401k, and they're still petrified because if they built that much up, they probably have a high-paying job and they've built a lifestyle right along with it that they're like, I need 20 grand a month to just afford my lifestyle that I'm living comfortably. And so if I leave my full-time job, I have no income coming in, and they're petrified to start dipping into that halfway through their career. So they're in handcuffs literally until they get to that magical age of 65 years old when they can pull the trigger on retirement. And they realize this at 40 years old. And they're like, I got 25 more years. So instead, my recommendation is to focus every dollar into the highest cash flowing assets first that you can, and forget about wealth building initially. And if you do that for a few years and you buy the right properties that cash flow really well, you can very quickly replace your full-time income. And then once you get to that place, now you've just freed up 40 plus hours a week of capacity, which is tens of thousands of hours of your life for the rest of your life cleared up because you've got assets that will pay you forever. And so then you can focus on wealth building. With all that time that you have, like, you're probably not just going to sit around and do nothing. So that's how it worked out for us. Once I realized that cash flow was the key, very quickly we replaced my full-time job and I was able to leave it. And then I could have an impact on other people and do things like the program that I teach and the podcast and, invest in more deals. And it grew from there. Our cash flow grew from there and our wealth grew from there. But that, I think that order is super important.
Yeah, that's key. And again, just another beauty of short-term rentals is that really, if done right, you can accomplish both at the same time, right?
Yeah.
You can build the cash flow and be building the wealth at the same time if you're doing the ownership model, hosting and arbitrage. But yeah, that's really is key. Kirby, thank you so much, man. You've given some really good words of wisdom here. And I know you just gave some great tips, but we like to ask at the end for our guests to leave our audience with 3 actionable or practical tips based on anything that we've talked about today.
Yeah, I think one of them would be that most people, in my experience, wait too long to leave their full-time job from what I've seen. Now, there's some people who are impulsive and just decide they're going to quit today and have no plan. But for planners, they tend to wait until everything is paid for the rest of their life and their kids' colleges are totally funded and every aspect. And they forget about a few key things. Number one is W-2 income is the least efficient income possible. So you don't need to make nearly as much from rentals as you do as your full-time job to still cover your expenses. They also focus on what they're making today instead of what do I actually need to live on? If I was living my ideal life, what does that look like? And a lot of your expenses go away when you don't have to commute an hour back and forth to a city and you're paying for lunches and all that stuff. So you actually might be able to live on a lot less than you do today. So don't just focus on what you're making today, but what you actually need. And then that what I talked about, that capacity standpoint, you're freeing up 40 plus hours a week of capacity. And people underestimate that. They're like, I'm making 10,000 in my job today per month. And so I have to get to a place where I'm making 10,000 of cash flow to quit. And they don't realize, what are you going to do with all that time once you get there? That's the starting place. So maybe you could be at 8,000. And now all of a sudden with 40 plus hours a week, you're probably going to use some of that time to continue to make more money. And in a worst case scenario, you can always go back to a 9-to-5 job. There's no shortage of jobs out there for ambitious people. It's not like you've made this decision that you could never change for the rest of your life. What I've seen as I've worked with people is the willingness the golden handcuffs are strong. And so I think it's really important to set a line in the sand of, if I get to a certain amount of cash flow based on what I need to live my ideal life, then I am going to take the steps and leave my full-time job. And if you do that, I think you find out pretty quickly that the ability to do that is there and that you don't need to wait as long as you think it might take.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Again, words of wisdom. And just to add to that, again, is what we talked about in the beginning of community and surrounding yourself with an entrepreneurial community. That's going to help you rip that Band-Aid off.
Yeah.
Right? So that if you go solo and you're just with your same work friends or whoever else, even if you achieve that financial goal, you're not going to rip that Band-Aid off because everybody around you is telling you that's a foolish thing to do. The importance, again, of community with the people that you want to be like. Yeah, those are great words of wisdom, Kirby. And Brenna, co-host, even though she's not here, she has a famous question. Not sure if it's going to apply. We'll see. But she likes to ask, what is your favorite pizza and from where?
It's been a little while since I've eaten, since trying to avoid the processed foods. But I'd say I probably have to say Chicago dough pizza is one of them, or Numero Uno's is another one in Chicago. The Chicago style pizza, it's tough to beat. It is probably one of the worst things you can possibly eat, but it is very good. That's for sure.
Wonderful. Excellent. And then Kirby, if people want to learn more about you, get in touch with you, learn about your program, et cetera, what are the best ways?
Yeah, I'd say the best place to start is just going to livingoffrentals.com/start. And I just recently, just a couple weeks ago, did a masterclass there where I talked through my whole strategy and how to most efficiently get to $10,000 a month of cash flow, which is a milestone that a lot of people have, and how you can use this strategy that I talk about to do that. I think that's a really good introduction to my thought process. And then from there, there's more that you can follow the YouTube channel, you can follow the podcast. There's all different ways to get educated.
Awesome. Thank you very much again, Kirby. We appreciate you taking the time and sharing some wisdom with us here on The Fit Investor. And ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned next week for another episode.
Thanks. Awesome to be here.